So in this video, I'm supposed to be doing a trigger essay. In other words, providing some kind of device by which to take a trivial or a random, almost thing and turn it into a much larger, much more big picture oriented discussion. Also, in this essay, I'm supposed to be focusing on or trying to incorporate the large tangential leaps that were characteristic of Montaigne. So in that respect, if my arguments aren't necessarily as tight as they might otherwise be, blame it on Montaigne. Blame it on him. Right. So, let me start with negative capability. It's a concept that we, I think well, it was assigned for the last class period that we were in one of the readings. It's a concept that was, I guess, invented by Keats, and it was described in a letter he wrote a couple of his brothers, if I remember correctly. Essentially what it was, again if I recall correctly, is it's a kind of mindlessness or thoughtlessness or an ability to or a desire to avoid reason and avoid considerations of truth or knowledge in your actions. To be kind of living in the moment, as it were. Another concept that we had discussed in the class, and it is backbone of this assignment is Montaigne's medallion. Montaigne's medallion was apparently some kind of I don't know. I couldn't really understand exactly what it looked like. Apparently there were, I think, a couple of different inscriptions on it, one of which was a Greek thing. I can't remember what that was, but then there was a scales on it. What exactly that looks like. But that was on there to remind him to weigh things or keep a measure of all things. But the main part of the medallion was an inscription on it that said, it was the French for, what do I know? Essentially, I think my interpretation of this was what kind of the same motivation that Rene Descartes had when he began his meditations, what they call their investigations into things, or I suppose trials might be a fair synonym. But in his trials, he wanted to discard all verisimilitudes, is a word from the reading, all kind of suspicions and half-truths and emotional outbursts that were not, that one didn't have a reason for believing, a conscious reason, presumably, and for which one didn't have proof. If it's just a suspicion or a vague idea, that was not good enough, and that was it was not the kind of rigor that he felt was appropriate. This approach, I would feel, or I do feel, is the exact opposite of the approach that Keats had invented. In one case, you want to try to limit yourself to only what you know and what you can deduce from reason using what you know. And the other, you want to ignore considerations of knowledge and reason and fact to the greatest degree possible. That being said, in this essay, in addition to having a trigger and being, I believe the word is, there's a word that means jumping from issue to issue. It's like, it's something I can't remember, but that one should kind of be all over the place in terms of what is, in terms of the breadth and consequently the depth of what one discusses. So, but those are the two of the factors: trigger and breadth. The third factor was to incorporate or to put on and bear Montaigne's medallion. A daunting, not an undaunting task, but moreover than that, it's not exactly, though I'll admit, a certain apparent level or a prima facie level, at a commonsensical level, it doesn't seem like a very complicated issue, the debate between whether one should be, well, I suppose, rational or thinking or feeling. You know, it's not an uncommon debate or dichotomy, but the way that it's phrased specifically with regard to knowledge and Yeah, knowledge. That's the part that gives me pause or hesitation or difficulty in comprehension. Um, for example, there's the problem of whether knowledge even exists or is possible. Um, Personally, I'm of the view that it's not. Um, there are many different arguments people put forth, but my favorite and the one I think that is the most definitive is that in order to uh, in order to know something, uh, one must not merely know the reasons to know something is the case. One must not merely know that something is the case. They must not merely know that, but they must know that there are reasons for knowing that, the reasons why they know what they know. They must know that there are valid reasons. And they must know, on top of that, that the reasons that they provided for saying that they knew what the reasons that they provided for saying that they knew whatever it was that they claimed that they knew, they must know that those reasons themselves are valid. You see where I'm going with this? That in you inevitably get an infinite regress into the causes of things, um, uh, or the accounting of reasonings for things that, as it so happens, don't really follow a similar kind of. What I mean to say is that just because you know the reasons for something does not mean that you, one, know the reasons uh, for the reasons for something, but that the reasons for something are often of a class that's entirely uh, different to the reasons for things. That the reasons for the reasons totally unlike the reasons um, uh, themselves. It's this phenomenon, I think, is encapsulated by the why game. It's kids play it. You know, they say, you know, you say, so, um, kid, I want you to clean your room. And they say, why? And you say, well, it's dirty. And they say, why? You say, because you marched in your room with dirty boots on. And they say, why? You say, why did you march in your room with dirty boots on? They say, yeah. And you say, well, you um, I don't know. I suppose you did it because you didn't want to take your boots off. Why? Um, uh, uh, see where I'm going with this? You might say that you knew why the room was dirty, but just because you say you know why the room is dirty does not mean that you know all of the things that are, you don't know the full chain of causation down the road. This why thing can go on forever. I think I managed to make it down through six whys before I got to a point that I had no idea what I was. I had no idea what to say. I mean, I imagine it wasn't a very difficult question, but it gets harder. And moreover, just because you can answer these questions doesn't mean that when you answered the question initially that you knew the answer, uh, or that you had considered, that you had considered the answer. So, in the initial instance of saying that you knew something, did you really know it if you hadn't even considered the, uh, the fundamental steps that indicate um, uh, the fundamental information that is requisite upon someone who claims to know something? Okay, that all being said, given the fact that this why thing is so um, infinite seeming, and that knowing things is something that exists in the temporal spatial world, and therefore it takes time to consider things, and as people don't really have an infinite amount of time, presumably their knowledge is finite, and that there are causes underneath the causes that they claim to have knowledge of that they have not even considered, and if they have considered them, they're not exactly sure of them. That, I think, is the fundamental, or is the best way in which knowledge can be brought into question, merely because of the inability to comprehend even the causes that go into uh, to understand the reasoning that you would have to provide for knowledge that you could say you know this. Say that someone says that they know the real world exists. You say, well, how do you know the real world exists? You're like, well, I have faith. And you say, well, how does faith tell you or impart knowledge to you that the real world exists? Well, God, you might say, God assures me of that. You said, well, how do you know that God assures you of that? You say, well, he spoke to me. You say, how do you know he spoke to you? I heard a voice. How do you know the voice is God's voice and not Satan's voice? Or how do you know the voice is not just um, a voice in your head, a hallucination? Um, I would say I'm not sure. I don't know. It is, and when I think about things just on following that basic why uh, why formula, knowledge, you know, certain knowledge that's incontrovertible, and that you know is incontrovertible, and that you know is incontrovertible. It's just not, it's at a practical level and at a theoretical level, not possible. Okay, so that's the problem with knowledge. Problem number 2 is even likely belief. People say that, okay, we can't know things for sure, but we can know things with more or less certainty, or with a 80% degree of certainty. This too, it seems to me, is subject to the same problem that knowledge is subject to. Any belief, really. And in other words, people say, oh, I'm 50% sure, 60% sure, 70% sure. We'll go with 70% sure. I'm 70% sure that it will rain tomorrow. The easiest way to get out of this is to say, well, what percent sure are you that you're 70% sure that it will rain tomorrow, right? Did you consult a meteorologist? Did you consult a rain dancer? Do you just have has it rained the last couple days, and that's why you think it will rain today? Or maybe it hasn't rained in a long time, and for some reason you think it will rain today? How much information are you basing your 70% thing on? Is it that just because it's something you have a 70% feeling that it will rain tomorrow doesn't mean that you have a 70% feeling that you have a 70% feeling that it will rain tomorrow. You may have a 5% feeling that you have a 70% feeling that it will rain tomorrow. For instance, like me, I have no idea whether it will rain tomorrow. But if I had to guess, I guess I would say 70%. But it's very not really based on anything. Or you might say, say there are 100 marbles in a bag. Math major, right? 100 marbles in a bag, and the bag owner, a guy who owns the bag, tells you that there are 95 of them, or 99 of them are white, and one is black. Now, we're going to say this guy, stand-up guy. You know him, never lied to you, most honest guy you know. If you're asked, what percentage or what odds do you put that, or what percent chance do you think it is that if you pull out one marble from the bag, that marble is the black one? I would say that it's, and pretty confidently that it's a 1% chance, one out of 100. Moreover, I would say, in a colloquial kind of way, that it's a 95, 98, 99% chance that it's a 1% chance. Right? Problem with this, as you might have guessed, is that you run into the same form of problem that you ran into with the problem with knowledge. That is, you get an infinite regress of percentages. You might say that it's a 1% chance that it's a black marble, and you might say that it's there's a 99% chance that there's a 1% chance that there's a marble. However, what percent chance is there that there's a 99% chance that there's a 1% chance that it's the black marble? I mean, that's just one. I hadn't even considered it, and considering it, I don't even understand it. And then suppose I go to the next level. I say, what percent chance is there of the percent chance that it's a 99% chance that there's a 1% chance that there's a marble? Now that's only the fourth level, and I'm totally, uh, out to sea. So that's likely belief. Based on those two considerations, it seems to me that the honest consequence of those, given my preconceptions about them, just considering them at a surface level, is that everything, if I have to take a guess, everything is, all belief is equally, entirely prejudice. That there's no reason or substantiation in fact that at least can be deduced from what is being said. And if that's the case, what is Montaigne's medallion other than just a joke or a torture device? I mean, if I'm supposed to adhere to it, it's what there's it wasn't Sisyphus, was it Tartarus? There's a Greek figure who angered some god. I imagine it was Hades, and as a result, he, locked him up and made it so that there was a tree above him with fruit in it. But whenever he raised his arm to get the fruit, the tree raised, and there was water below him, and whenever he lowered himself to drink the water level dropped just below his face. This, I feel, is what is being done by this mandate to wear the medallion. However, all this being said, there is a solution. I mean, because it still seems to me that there is a fundamental difference between the negative capability that Keats described and the medallion. Whatever else whatever other considerations have been brought up, even if it's not really knowledge that the medallion is meant to impact, there's still a difference that needs to be, that equal, complete prejudice between these two things. I don't feel if maybe there's an equal level of total prejudice, but there's still some other factor that I think it should be put forth. So here's, because this has gone on again probably longer than it should have been. Here's the solution, and it's a solution. This was the point of the trigger. It's a solution that provides a lot of interesting answers to kind of, I guess you'd say, more philosophical questions. So it was a good, this medallion, for whatever it's worth, was a useful trigger, but I suppose that's not for me to decide. Right. So here's how it goes. You want to consider consciousness. And by consciousness, I merely mean your feelings. Any feeling you have that is consciousness. Right? I don't necessarily mean being conscious as people might mean it in a colloquial sense, as being self-conscious. Like you might say, are you conscious of what you're doing? In most cases, the answer is obviously yes. But in the context in which it's used, in that circumstance, conscious really means, are you conscious of being conscious? Which is another question. But that consciousness is taking place at the time. Wherever there's feeling, there's consciousness. So the source of dispelling this confusion that arose between Montaigne's medallion and the negative capability is, I feel, through this analysis of the movement of consciousness. So, for the purposes of this argument, imagine a person who had never had an experience before, never had a feeling before. Their first feeling would be, presumably, you'd probably say just sensation. Let's suppose they have all their senses that work. Sight, smell, all those sorts of things. So they suddenly open their eyes, open their ears, open their mouths, open their hands, and have a sensation like that. Now, it's my contention that we don't have consciousness of sensation. Why? Because there are certain signs that sensation is in fact not, that it's altered, and that we don't ever really have, there's evidence of tampering that suggests that even if there's evidence of tampering. For example, until just about 5 seconds ago, I really had no consciousness or feeling or thought that there was air going through my nose and out my mouth. And then again, just about 5 seconds ago, I had no idea that right here I can feel some hair on my ear right here. Or, let me think about things. Okay, until 5 seconds ago, I didn't know that my toes were not straight right now, but that they weren't straight, right? But they were kind of like curved, so that they were kind of like pushed against the ground. In other words, as time goes on, I'm constantly having sensations, right? I'm not denying that the nerves in my throat weren't kind of detecting the movement of air, or that the nerves on my ears weren't detecting the contact with the hair, or that my toes, the nerves on my toes weren't detecting the force on the ground. Um, Merely contending that um, what do you call it? It seems that certain information, presumably more information on the trivial side, is blocked out of the um, of the perception process um, uh, before I even have a chance to be aware of it and decide whether or not it's important. Um, that's the principal thing. So it seems to me that it runs through, that sensations obviously what happens in the eye moves through the brain and all, through other parts of the brain until it eventually sparks up some kind of consciousness. But if it moves through the brain and it changes and it's affected as it moves along, it's not really the same thing as the thing that initially hit our eyes. It's the result of both the brain's influence as well as the influence of vision. And for that reason, I say that it's perception, though maybe someone can offer a counterexample. I'm not sure, but just for the purposes of moving along and what have you. First step of consciousness or feeling is perception. It's easiest to view this in a kind of to view time not as a continuous thing, but as a discrete thing where you have one picture. It's kind of like in an animation movie where you have a picture and another picture very similar like it, another picture very similar like it, and when you flick it like a book, you can kind of see the movie. It's best to view consciousness like that. So in the first picture, you just have the perception. And the second thing, you have a reflex to the perception. And sensation, well, if you're having a reflex, well, in any case, right, so if someone hits you on the knee, if the doctor hits you on the knee with a little, uh, whatchamacallit, little hammer thing, your knee kicks. If you see a monster climbing out from under your bed late at night, you have a reaction, a reflex maybe, of horror. What else? Um, if you have a perception of heat, your reflex may be to generate sweat. All of these kinds of things, the body takes these influences from the environment. Not only does it turn them into perceptions, but it also has reactions to them which operate outside of the mind. Some of them are internal to are part of the mind, but some things like hitting the knee I mean, it are external to consciousness, is rather not external to the mind, but external to consciousness. They take place on a subconscious, you might say, level. So, okay, you have feeling, or I'm sorry, you have perception, reflex, and during that next, you have the first unit of time is just perception. The second unit of time, you have perception, but you also have reflex off of that first perception. Now, in the third unit of time, you obviously have your new perception. You obviously have reflection on the or reflex off of the perception of the second perception. But you also now have a reflex that happens from the reflex of I wish I could draw this out. In the first thing you have just the perception. In the second one you have perception, that time segment, it's not a segment, but that time instance perception, as well as it's a reflection, or I'm sorry, a reflex off of the first perception, which was really just sensation brought, through the different channels into consciousness. In the third one, though, you have a you have the perception that you get from each segment. You have the reflex off of the previous segment, but you also have the reflex off of the perception of the original statement. What does that mean? That means that your I hate to do this. It's okay in Montaigne fashion. I'm going to cut it off here. What a shame. Yeah. I tried it out, but it just it got to be too much. As a matter of fact, let me just say that the effect of all of this argument is to show that science and faith are quantitative rather than qualitative distinctions. That is, that faith is just the kind of like the initial act, whereas, or you might say that correspondingly with thinking and feeling, that feeling is the initial act, and that thinking is just the feeling upon feeling. That's one consequence of this. Another is what's the point of consciousness? It's to, as is represented in the fact that certain sensations are ignored and certain sensations are not ignored, that it provides a sieve through which more important sensations are given extra analysis, an extra attention that they would not otherwise use. Without consciousness, all, particularly with perception, they don't, certain things get, everything, all of the sensations that you would receive would presumably receive equal focus, whereas obviously certain sensations are more important than others. If you hear, I don't know, a fire alarm, for instance, other things going on might only distract you. I've gone on for way too long. Alright, well, if you stuck through it, thank you very much. Sorry for following the guidelines of the essay. Any case, yeah, thanks. Comment, talk to me about it, whatever.